Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're going to work through another quilt in my book, Simple Quilts for the Modern Home. Today we're going to be making stripes. This is probably the fastest quilt in the book because it is entirely strip piece and it has a lot of really big pieces in it. The center bit with all those black checks, that is actually a printed fabric. And all of the stripes in the center, that is also a printed fabric. So this is one where you can see some of those really big modern prints where you look at and you're like, what in the heck am I going to do with that? But I love it. This is a good one to show those prints off with. And depending on how you choose, it can make it look like you did a whole lot more work than you actually did. But really, we're just going to strip piece the whole thing. So this is going to be one of the easiest videos we've ever done because it's covering a really basic, very beginner friendly technique. So if you've got a quilt that you need to just get together fast for a gift, this makes a nice lap size quilt that you can just have at your home to show off some fabric that you love or to give as a gift for a wedding, graduation, anything like that. We also have had some people in our brick and mortar shop who have seen this and got it to make with their kids and their grandkids because it is a great beginner project. And we do have kits while supplies last of this. We were able to snag up the very last of this fabric that is in existence. So when they're gone, they're gone. We're unfortunately not able to order more. But we do have a limited supply while they last. And of course, you can get the book over at our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. All right, let's get started. All right, so I've got some of my strips laid out here, and both the top and bottom bits on the left side and then the top and bottom bits on the right side are going to be strip piece from widths of fabric. And you can see here that I picked one. This is just one fabric. This is not pieced. It just has a very linear print to it. So when you put it together, it looks like you pieced all of these lines and the little triangles in it, but really you just did a really good job picking fabric. So this is a great one where if you have like a real directional, a real linear print that you want to use, this is a good one to do it. This quilt actually always gets a lot of wows when I show it in person because they think I've pieced all this. But then I let them in on the secret that you now know too, that it's the fabric. So this is a really great way to make this work. This is Art Gallery Fabrics, and I really love their fabrics. They're real soft and lovely to work with. We use it for about half the quilts in the book. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start strip piecing these together. And one thing you do want to make sure is that if you do have a directional fabric, so like this one slants in a very particular direction, you want to make sure that that is going the same way in every one of your strip sets because we're making a couple of these. And otherwise it might look a little different if it was, say, flip the other direction for a different one. So just pay attention if you have any kind of directional prints. But all I'm going to do here is I'm going to flip these guys right sides together. And we're just going to line up our edges and sew our quarter-inch seam all the way down it. And it's just going to go really, really fast. So I never pin when I'm doing strip piecing. All I do is I align my edges together and I get my selvages nice and lined up. And it's once I've got those right edges together, I just line them up with the edge of my presser foot. And I'm just going to sew that quarter-inch seam. And what I like to do is I just kind of lift up a little bit and I kind of put my finger in between there and then just lay it down. And then however wide your sewing machine throat is, I'll just put my hand at the bottom there and I just use that to kind of hold everything in place. I don't worry about any other part of the strip other than what is on top of my sewing machine throat. And once my hand has made it up to that foot, then I just repeat that process and go ahead and sew again. Again, this is a really basic, really beginner technique. So if you have been sewing for any length of time, it's probably something you've done and it'll make this quilt go super fast for you. One thing to note when you're strip piecing is that your strips may not end up being the same size, even if they're from the same line like these are. And don't worry about that. It's totally fine. We're going to trim up the edges. Now what you can do to save even more time, since we're making several of these, is we're just going to chain piece them all through. So you can do all your chain piecing all at once and just get your strip sets all sewn together. I'm just going to go ahead and sew my entire strip set together here. I've got 5 bits that are going to be in it, and I'm going to wait to press until it's all done. So go ahead and do that. You can follow the cutting instructions and the layout diagram in your book to know what to do for what goes where. So I've literally been filming for like 15 minutes and I've already got my first strip set completely sewn together. I just have to press it. So that just shows you how really fast this quilt is, because even though I've been filming for 15 minutes, it means I've been sewing for even less time. So super, super fast. All right, now I'm gonna press these seams open. I'm gonna show you how to cut it down. So I really like to press seams open. I feel like I get a really great join that way, and the quilt lays nice and flat. So to do that, I just kind of open up the seam with my fingertips, and then I hold like 3 fingers down at least, sometimes 4, to kind of pre-press that seam open ahead of the iron. And then I just keep the nose or the tip of that iron right down the center of that seam, and I just keep on going. It takes a little bit of practice to get that motion down, but once you have it, it goes super fast. You just want to make sure there's no wiggles in it, because if there's a wiggle on the back side, it means there's a pleat on the other side and you don't have a good press. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way down all my sides, and then I'm going to press from the other side as well to make sure it's nice and flat. When you get to the center one, it's a little bit closer with the seams. So you just want to make sure that you're kind of angling your iron so that you're not pressing over the seam that you already pressed if you're waiting to do it until the end, because you might accidentally press something going the wrong way. When I'm done, I always do like to press from the right side as well, just to get those seams really, really nice and flat. All right, so we've got our first big main strip set all together, and there are just a couple of these to make. So if you were doing this at home, you probably could have a really good chunk of this quilt together in under an hour, which is really awesome for any quilt that you're making, especially a lap size quilt. So I need to square up the edge before I can really do anything with this. So what I'm doing is I'm lining up the inch lines on my ruler with my piecing, and I'm just making sure that I've got as close to the selvage as I can get without going over on anything. Everything is looking pretty good there, so I'm just going to go ahead and give that a trim so that I've got a nice square edge to work with here. Then that'll be the edge of your quilt and what you sew to your vertical panel. So now we have this really big long strip that needs to be trimmed to a specific size so that our entire left panel and our entire right panel are the same width. So in the larger one, it's going to be longer than your ruler is. So I'm going to show you how you can measure something that's longer. So most rulers, they're going to be 24 inches. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to line up some inch marks with my seam line, so that way I know I'm nice and square here. And then I'm going to get it nice and even with the left side, which is what I just squared up and then flipped going the other direction. Next, I'm going to take a friction gel pen and I'm going to go ahead and make a little mark here. This will go away with heat, but I always like to put it in the seam allowance. That way, just in case anything crazy happens, it's no big deal. I'm also going to do the same thing on the bottom so that I've got nice even measurements to go by. The camera is not loving this pink, so it might be a little hard to see, but I've got my black line there. So what I can do then is line up the edge of my ruler with that, and again, keep my, in this case, a 1/4 inch mark even with the edge here. And then I can measure over to the distance that I need for the next part and make that little hash mark again, and then I've got my guide for cutting. So I'm going to measure over, make that mark, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. So basically you're taking the measurement that you need to cut this to, which is in the book. I'm not going to share it with you here. You got to get the book in order to get that. And I'm subtracting 24 for it, and then I'm measuring over that amount, making a second hash mark. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, and then we're going to be able to cut between those 2 hash marks. All right, so I've got everything lined up here, and what I'm doing is I'm lining up my ruler with the hash marks that I made on the top and bottom, and then I'm going to line up inch marks with the seam allowances here. That way I know I'm nice and straight going all the way down. Once I'm happy with how everything is lined up, I'm going to take my rotary cutter and just cut across. All right, so now I've got my piece cut and squared up on both ends, and I can be confident that it is the width I need it to be. So I've got that ready to go. You're going to do it again for your bottom piece, and then you're also going to cut your center panel. It's just a width of fabric, and you're going to cut that as well. And you can use the same techniques to make sure that everything is the width it's supposed to be. When you're doing the side piece, that's going to come from one strip set, and you can use the same measuring techniques in order to cut that to the right width as well. All right, so I'm not gonna show sewing this to the center panel because that is a fabric that we have a really limited amount of, and I don't want to make an entire quilt here and then have you guys one of you not be able to make it. So that's how you strip piece everything. You're gonna sew it to that big center bit. It's just a big strip piecing project again, just you have a really wide strip, and then you're going to add that to the bottom. Same thing on the other side. I am going to show you a really great tip for getting everything to line up really neatly when you are putting together your center strip though, and so I'm going to show you that next. So the very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and square up my size to cut off that selvage. I'm going to do that with all of my strips for that vertical panel that's in there, and then we're going to start sewing them together. And in this one, we are not going to press our seams open. I only press them to one side when I have a really specific reason for doing it, and this is one of those reasons. So we're going to go over that in just a second. But for now, go ahead and square up the edges of all the pieces that you're using for that vertical panel, and then come on back and we'll get sewing. So the first thing I'm going to do is arrange everything right sides together. And if you want to pin, you can. I don't because it's just a really small bit. And I'm going to sew it together end to end along the short sides. And I'm just going to chain piece all of these and get it done all at once. If you're using our kit or if you're using directional fabric, you want to make the time to just kind of open it up to make sure that it's going to be going in the same direction once you've sewn it together. In this case, my little raindrop looking things are going the right way when you open that up, so I know I'm good to go sewing this together. All right, so I'm going to set my seam on both of these, and then I'm going to lift this up. And first I'm going to finger press it to make sure the seam is going up away, and when everything is kind of slanting down to the bottom here. This will get the seams pressed in the same direction on both of these, which is important because we're going to press the center bit going in the opposite direction. Go ahead and press this one too. And of course, these guys don't line up perfectly in terms of the print, but in the end, you're not going to notice that, so I don't really worry too much about that. Now, this center fabric really doesn't have a direction, so if you can really press it any which way, but if you had one that was directional, you would just want to make sure it was going in the opposite direction of whatever you pressed the outside strips, because we're going to nest those seams in just a second. All right, so I've got these guys lined up, and I have it so that my seam on my center section is going off to the left and my top is going to the right. Those seams are going to nest together really nicely and make for a really great join so that all these center seams are coming together at the same point. So I'm going to go ahead and flip these guys right sides together. And you can see when you look at it from the top, we've got the bottom going to the left, top going to the right. And you can really, this is where the disadvantage of watching this on video comes in. What you want to do is kind of feel this. It should feel like a threshold at your home where it just smoothly transfers from one to the other. If you feel a big bump, it means that these seams are on top of each other. If you feel a gap, it means they're too far apart. So you want them to just be real nice and tight in there. And then I always pin in the right side of that seam allowance, because what we're going to do is we're going to sew along on our sewing machine, and when we hit the first half of the seam allowance, we're going to stop with our needle down, pull that pin out, and then you'll be able to sew along and have a great join. Now, of course, this isn't going to work if we end up with a whole bunch of fabric bunched up in here. So this is the one time when I'm strip piecing where I am going to pin. So probably about every 6 inches or so, I've got that nice and flat. And I'm just going to work my way around from the top to bottom and basically working from the center out so that I have a nice smooth fabric and we don't have to ease anything in and have it look a little funky. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way along, and then we'll be good to go. As long as I'm already in pinning mode, I'm just going to go ahead and pin the other strip to the other side. And again, if you have directional fabric, just take a minute to make sure it's all going in the same direction. I should point out again that if your strips end up being all different lengths, all 3 of these are in my case, don't panic. We're going to trim that up after it's all sewn together. And it just means that maybe your strips are a little bit different length to start with, or maybe you trim them up a little bit differently when you were squaring up your edges. Either way, no big deal. Don't worry about it. So now I'm just going to sew my 1/4 inch seam like normal. The only difference being is I've got some pins to remove along the way. Again, when you come to that center seam, go ahead and stop with your needle down in the first half of that seam allowance. Then go ahead and pull your pin. That needle kind of acts like a pin and keeps everything nice and tight right where you meant it to be. So just like on the last set of strip piece units, I'm going to go ahead and press these seams open to get a nice flat join. Again, I really only press seams in one direction or the other when I've got a really good reason for it, like in the center of this, wanting those seams to nest together perfectly. And that's a great, easy way to do it because you don't have a ton of other, corners coming together there. And so that's a good place to do it. All right, so go ahead and press all the way down. And then when you make it all the way down, go ahead and flip it over and give it another press from the right side. And I'm going to give you a tip for getting your edges together when you are putting the entire quilt together. But otherwise, we almost are done with you guys knowing everything you need to know to make this quilt. So before I start assembling anything, I'm going to go ahead and square that up again. So I'm just going to move it over to where the selvages are, making sure that I've got some inch lines even with those seam allowances. That way I've got a nice square top. So we'll take that off to the side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up so that way these are nice and even when you're putting them together. All right, so we're going to pretend that this little piece that I cut off when I was getting my left piece to the width it needed to be is the entire left panel. It's going to be bigger than this, but we're just going to pretend for right now. So what you want to do when you're sewing this together is just make sure that you square that edge up first for the top, and then you're going to lay your right sides together for both of these sides. Your left side's going to be a lot bigger, so it might be easier to put your right side on first to make this a more manageable piece to work with. And then you want to make sure that it's nice and even on the bottom as well, because you're going to have your strip set, you're going to have your big with the fabric section, and then you're going to have another strip set. And that's really it. That's all you need to do when you're doing this, is just make sure that when you're flipping these guys right sides together, that this top is nice and even with this piece right here, and then that this whole section is nice and even with that top, and then just pin and sew. And I know that if you followed me for any length of time, you know I don't really like to pin, but this is an instance when you're going to make sure that you do that. And you can also, when you're doing this, so say we flip this right sides together and we've sewn it all together, when you are then sewing it over here, you're going to be able to check and see that these are lining up evenly as well, because you'll be able to see, is this piece in line with right here? And if not, you can make little adjustments to make that happen. Well, like I said, this is one of the fastest, easiest quilts in the entire book. It is great for if you have really cool prints to work with that can make it look like you did more work than you did. Like in this case, it looks like you pieced all of this, but you did not. You just got a cool print to go with it. And especially with any of those modern fabrics where they just look awesome and it's really large, you don't want to cut it up, this is a really good one to use that in. So the pattern is in Simple Quilts from the Modern Home. It is my book, and we have been working through all the quilts in it throughout the year. We're about halfway through. We've got one more one that is straight line piecing, and then we're going to get into some fun different things. We're going to do some applique. We're going to start working on some 60-degree triangles and diamonds, and we're going to culminate with a sew along at the very end. So I'm glad you guys are enjoying it and that you're enjoying the book. There's 12 patterns in it, so if you really enjoy some of these videos, it ends up being a really good deal because the price of the book is less than the cost of 2 patterns. So great deal. Simple Quilts for the Modern Home. This one is called Stripes. We're going to have a very limited supply of kits because we got the last of this fabric that is in existence. Unfortunately, when you do a book, you make the quilts a long time before they ever see the light of day. And so we were able to get the very last of this that existed, and now it is out. And if you really like it, you want to give it a go, we have a few where you can make it the way that the original. Otherwise, go check out our website. We've got lots of fabric to choose from and get you inspired. Thanks so much for following along, and until next week, happy quilting.